Well, hello everyone. This is your friendly neighborhood pastor, Pastor Chris Johnson, coming to you from Christ the King Lutheran Church here in Escanaba, Michigan. We are getting ready this weekend for the 17th Sunday after Pentecost. And again, our church has taken a little bit of a break to commemorate the 500-year anniversary of the Lutheran Reformation. We're walking through the small catechism, and in September and October we are focusing on the 10 Commandments. And so this week we find ourselves with the 6th commandment: "You shall not commit adultery." Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. Took a little bit of a break last week, so I apologize for missing out on the 5th commandment: "You shall not kill, you shall not murder." So today we're going to be talking about the 6th commandment: "You shall not commit adultery." And so this commandment, of course, involves the importance and the essential upholding of intimacy between husband and wife. And so, in other words, this commandment is about sex. We can talk about that in the church, and maybe one of the great failures of the church in this day and age has been to stay away from talking about issues of sex and sexuality and sexual immorality and things like that. And maybe that's kind of an overreaction, because some churches, that's all they focus on, and then some churches tend not to focus on it at all. And so you got to have a little bit of a balance. You don't want to overly focus on this, because, sexual sin, it's a big deal. Infidelity, it's a big deal. Pornography, it's a big deal. Those struggling with same-sex attraction, homosexuality, that's a very big deal for them, but also for the church and how we minister to those people who have those struggles. And so we want to treat all of those issues when it comes to human sexuality with great care, but also knowing that that sexual sin is, while a very important thing for the church to address, there's, I don't want to say bigger sins, but there are things that are a lot more devastating to the life of faith than sin that is sexual. Though I will say that people can have their life of faith completely destroyed because of sexual sin, whether it's infidelity to their spouse, breaking themselves against this 6th commandment: "You shall not commit adultery," or for any whatever. Just so many bad things can happen when sexual ethic has been violated, and people have been violated, your conscience, and a lot of people live with regret of especially their youthful ignorance and what they did, and living with the baggage of all that stuff from the past that sometimes the devil will hold before him and say, remember when you did this, that, and the other things. So again, we don't want to make a huge deal out of sexual sin, but we also want to make it a very important thing to talk about, because, well, it is one of God's commandments. And so to follow God's commandments is very, very important. As Paul says quite explicitly, those who are sexually immoral will not enter the kingdom of heaven. But Paul also tempers that with a fair bit of grace in 1 Corinthians 6 and 7 as well. So to get us underway, well, we've already been underway, I just wanted to read some things here for you from C.S. Lewis in his book, his gem, Mere Christianity. In book 3 of Mere Christianity, chapters 5 and 6, he talks about Christian marriage and Christian sexual morality, and I refer you to that because he does such a wonderful job in unpacking that. But here are a few things that Lewis has to say about sex and sexuality. And this is, again, 70 years ago that C.S. Lewis is writing this. He says, "Contraceptives have made sexual indulgence far less costly within marriage and far safer outside of it than ever before, and public opinion is less hostile to illicit unions and even to perversion than it has been since pagan times. Perversions of the sex instinct are numerous, hard to cure, and frightful. They tell you sex has become a mess because it was hushed up, but for the last 20 years it has not been. It had been chatted about all day long, yet it still is in a mess. If hushing up had been the cause of all the trouble, ventilation would have set it right, but it has not." That's from chapter 5, and at the end of chapter 5, he unpacks that sexual sin, while a huge deal, can be overcome and can be conquered. He says at the end of, in a very memorable line at the end of chapter 5, a cold, self-righteous prig would be harder. It would be harder for them to get into heaven than a prostitute. And so, and that's, if we were following lectionary, we would be hearing about that from Matthew 21, how it's how tax collectors and prostitutes are going into heaven before the self-righteous prigs that we hear about from that are the Pharisees. So, you shall not commit adultery. The Bible lifts up sexual impropriety and the harm that it causes, and certainly it causes harm in the midst of family life. And it's no surprise that the commandment to not commit adultery comes right after the commandment to not commit murder, to not lawlessly take the life of someone else. And in the Large Catechism, Martin Luther says that this follows so nicely because in the fifth commandment, we are told to guard and preserve and protect our neighbor's physical well-being. Well, the next thing that is the greatest gift to our neighbor, the next greatest gift to their life is their spouse. And so this spouse, this commandment to protect the spouse is so essential and so important because the spouse is one of the greatest gifts of God next to our life that the Lord has given to us. And so adultery, the prohibition against adultery is, of course, very, very, very important. And so that's why the Bible lifts it up again and again. Paul's letters talk about it a lot. About fleeing sexual immorality and fornication and things of that like, because that can become someone's God. And so for Paul, as he was evangelizing those early Gentiles who had a very skewed sense of what proper biblical God-pleasing sexual ethics looks like, he had to really wrangle, herd the cats in, because it was just such a foreign notion for some of them that what we do with our body parts matters, and it matters to God. I mean, certainly it's a very private affair between husband and wife, but how we use our bodies for the glory of God is very, very important, because God has, again, given us our bodies, that we are created in the image of God. And so some other places, Hebrews chapter 13, the author of Hebrews talks about how marriage ought to be honored by all, that marriage is a great gift from God. That goes way back to Genesis chapter 2, that God created humankind in his image, male and female. He created them, and the two shall become one flesh. And so marriage is a part of that ordering society of not only for procreation, but also for the proper enjoyment of sexuality within the confines of marriage. That, as C.S. Lewis also mentions in his book, Mere Christianity, that Christians are the ones who have lifted up the importance of proper sexuality, that all the finest love poets are themselves Christians. You look in the Song of Solomon in the Old Testament, it's a great long love poem about human intimacy between husband and wife, or those who are about to be betrothed and married. And so it's a great, great gift to not be perverted and honored. Often heaven is depicted in Jesus's parables as a wedding banquet, that there's something so beautiful and awesome about a wedding, that this commandment, you shall not commit adultery, honors that covenant and those promises those people make to one another. So there's lots of stuff going on here in this commandment. I certainly can't touch on all of it, but just know that ultimately this commandment, you shall not commit adultery, is all about the gift of marriage, that marriage is a gift, spouses are a gift, and so that's why Luther says in the Small Catechism, we are to fear and love God, so that in matters of sex, our words and conduct are pure and honorable, and husband and wife love and respect one another. So even within marriage, husband and wife need to keep that very much in mind. So a lot of stuff going on here. May the Lord lead you and bless you and guide you as you dig into this, and pray for those people who you know who are married, who may be struggling in their marriage, who are thinking about marriage, because marriage is a gift, it's a joy, it's a struggle, but it's ultimately from God, and our spouse is one of the greatest gifts of God that we have. Gifts from God that we have. So we'll talk to you later next time. Bye.